Have you ever poured your soul into something, only to have the people you love most call it a joke? I have. And for a long time, I believed them. It took being kicked out into the freezing cold on Christmas Day for me to finally start proving them wrong. The scent of roasting turkey and pine needles always felt like a warm hug, but not today. Today it felt like a judgment. I sat at the long, polished mahogany table in my parents' dining room, trying to make myself as small as possible. The room was a fortress of my father's success. Crystal glasses caught the light from the roaring fireplace, casting tiny rainbows on the pristine white tablecloth. Silverware, heavy and ornate, flanked each plate. It was the annual Evans family Christmas dinner, an event less about celebration and more about a public performance of prosperity. My sister, Jessica, was the star of the show. As always, 3 years older, a high-powered real estate agent, with teeth as white as the fresh snow outside. She was a perfect mirror of our father's values. She was talking loudly, her voice sharp and confident, about her latest achievement, and we closed just under the wire, a 7-figure commercial property. The commission alone paid for the new Mercedes, she announced, gesturing with a hand weighed down by a diamond bracelet. My father, Richard Evans, beamed. He was a man built of solid, uncompromising lines, from his square jaw to his belief that the world ran on numbers and nothing else. That's my girl, he boomed, raising his wine glass. To Jessica, to a record-breaking quarter. That's what hard work and a smart head gets you. A chorus of "to Jessica" echoed around the table. My mother, Carol, gave her a radiant, proud smile. My brother-in-law, Mark, a quiet accountant, who always seemed to shrink in my father's presence, raised his glass obediently. Even the special guest, Miss Henderson, a potential investor my father was trying to woo, gave a polite nod. Mr. Henderson was a man of quiet observation, his expensive suit doing all the talking for him. He watched everyone, his eyes missing nothing, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he was cataloging every interaction. I took a small sip of my water, hoping the toast would be the end of it. I just had to survive a few more hours of this performance, and then I could retreat back to the relative safety of my tiny apartment. But my father's gaze, heavy and critical, landed on me. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a familiar disappointment. And Amelia, he said, his voice dropping. The cheerful atmosphere in the room instantly chilled. What great achievements are you celebrating this year? I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. I knew this was a trap. It always was. Things are fine, Dad, I mumbled, staring at my plate. Fine? He scoffed. What does fine mean? Your sister is out there building an empire. What are you doing with that? That degree. He said the word degree like it was something foul he had stepped in. It's an art history and sociolinguistics degree, Dad, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He waved a dismissive hand. Semantics. It's a worthless piece of paper. I paid a fortune for it. And for what? So you can analyze paint smudges and old words. Are you even using it? I should have lied. I should have invented some prestigious unpaid internship at a museum. But I was tired of lying. I'm waitressing at the corner bistro to make ends meet, I admitted. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Jessica let out a small, sharp laugh, which she tried to cover with a cough. Mark stared intently at his mashed potatoes, his knuckles white around his fork. My mother's smile was frozen on her face, her eyes pleading with me to just be quiet. My father's face darkened. The festive red of his sweater suddenly seemed menacing. Waitressing, he repeated, the word dripping with contempt. So I paid for a top-tier education so you could carry plates for a living. You're a failure, Amelia. A complete and utter failure. The words hit me like physical blows. Each one was a stone, and I could feel them piling up on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Richard, please, my mother whispered, her voice thin and ineffective. It's Christmas. Don't you, Richard, please me. Carol, he snapped, not even looking at her. His eyes were locked on me. This isn't about Christmas, it's about reality. I work my fingers to the bone to give you kids every opportunity, and this is how you repay me. By becoming a loser. A drain on this family. I'm done, do you hear me? I am done funding this useless fantasy of yours. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, a polite signal of his discomfort, but my father was too far gone in his rage to notice. You're a nobody, Amelia. He spat. You contribute nothing. You are a walking embarrassment to the Evans name. I could feel tears welling up, hot and shameful. I blinked them back, refusing to give him the satisfaction. I looked at Jessica, who was now watching with a cold, triumphant smirk. She loved this. She loved being the golden child, and my status as the family disappointment only made her shine brighter. My father stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He pointed a thick finger at the front door. Get out, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I don't want a nobody sitting at my table on Christmas Day. Go back to your bistro. Go be useless somewhere else. The shock was so profound it left me breathless. I looked at my mother, my last hope. Her face was a mask of strained neutrality. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was choosing her husband, choosing the peace of her comfortable life over her own daughter. She was enabling this, just as she always had. No one said a word. The air was thick with my humiliation. I pushed my chair back, the sound echoing in the silent room. My hands were trembling as I stood up. I didn't look at any of them. I could. The weight of their judgment was too much to bear. I walked out of the dining room, down the hall, and to the front door. I didn't grab my purse. I didn't grab my thin jacket from the closet. I just opened the heavy oak door and stepped out. The freezing December air hit my bare arms like 1,000 tiny needles. Snow was falling in thick, silent flakes, already dusting my hair and shoulders. The door clicked shut behind me, a sound of absolute finality. I was kicked out, banned, excluded. As I stood there shivering on the porch, the sound of muffled laughter reached me through the thick wood of the door. It was my father's, joined by Jessica's. They were laughing at me. The sound was the cruelest blow of all. It shattered the last piece of me that had clung to the hope that they loved me. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning fire in my gut, and an icy chill on my skin. I wrapped my arms around myself and started walking down the long, snow-covered driveway, away from the warm, golden lights of the house. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I could never go back. The walk from my parents' palatial home to the bus stop felt like a journey across a frozen planet. By the time I fumbled for change with numb fingers, my cheap sweater was soaked through and my teeth were chattering uncontrollably. The bus was mostly empty, its heater rattling feebly against the winter chill. I huddled in a corner seat, staring out at the blurry Christmas lights of other happier homes, the ghost of my family's laughter still ringing in my ear. My apartment wasn't just an apartment, it was a testament to my current station in life. A fourth-floor walk-up in a building that smelled perpetually of damp laundry and boiled cabbage. The radiator in my main room, which was also my bedroom and kitchen, clanked and hissed like a dying animal, producing a pathetic trickle of warmth that did nothing to combat the draft seeping in from the ill-fitting window frame. I had taped plastic over it, but the cold was relentless. The contrast between this cramped, cold space and the opulent warmth of my father's house was a fresh slap in the face. There they were likely enjoying dessert now. My mother's famous crème brûlée, without a second thought for the daughter they had just cast out into a snowstorm. The next few weeks blurred into a grim routine of survival. The money I had saved from my waitressing job, a meager sum I'd been hoarding for a security deposit on a better place, vanished with alarming speed. Rent, utilities, a new, warmer coat from a second-hand store. The Christmas humiliation had cost me more than just my dignity. My diet devolved into a sad rotation of instant noodles, cheap bread, and peanut butter. I remember one night, standing in the aisle of a 24-hour convenience store, calculating whether I could afford a small carton of milk or if I should just stick to water. That was my tangible struggle, not a dramatic cinematic poverty, but the quiet, grinding misery of counting pennies for basic sustenance. The humiliation from Christmas was a constant companion. It replayed in my mind on a loop. My father's sneering face, Jessica's triumphant smirk, my mother's deliberate blindness. The words, failure, loser, nobody became my internal monologue. They were right. What had I accomplished? I was 24 years old, living in a shoebox eating ramen, and my greatest skill was remembering who ordered the decaf cappuccino. The anger I'd felt that night had mostly fizzled out, replaced by a deep, hollow despair. I started applying for jobs. Any job that wasn't in food service. I spent hours in the public library, using their free internet to fill out online applications for entry-level corporate positions: data entry clerk, administrative assistant, junior project coordinator. I sent out dozens of resumes. The rejections, when they came at all, were swift and impersonal. Most of the time, there was just silence. My resume was a lead balloon. Bachelor of Arts, Art History and Sociolinguistics, was a red flag for hiring managers looking for business or marketing degrees. It screamed unserious. It screamed unemployable. It screamed everything my father had been telling me for years. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in mid-January. It was gray and sleeting outside, a perfect match for my mood. I came home from a long, soul-crushing shift at the bistro, my feet aching and my clothes smelling of grease, to find a crisp white envelope taped to my door. It wasn't a friendly note. The bold, red letters at the top spelled it out. Eviction notice. I had been 3 weeks late on my rent. My landlord, a man I'd never met, had run out of patience. I tore it from the door and stumbled inside, the official-looking paper trembling in my hand. I sank to the floor, my back against the flimsy door. All the fight went out of me. The eviction notice, the pile of rejection emails on my laptop, the gnawing hunger in my stomach, it all converged into one undeniable truth. My father was right. I was a failure. I curled into a ball on the cold linoleum, the eviction notice crumpled in my fist, and I cried. Not the hot, angry tears of Christmas night, but the deep, ragged sobs of utter defeat. I cried for the girl who loved museums, for the student who was passionate about her studies, and for the woman who was now about to be homeless because she had dared to choose a path her family deemed worthless. In that moment, on that freezing floor, I believed them. I was a nobody. Rock bottom, I discovered, had a basement, and I was in it. A few days passed in a gray haze. I barely ate. I called in sick to the bistro, unable to face the thought of smiling at customers while my world was crumbling. The eviction notice sat on my small, wobbly kitchen table, like a death sentence. I had exhausted every option I could think of. I had no one. My family had made it clear where I stood, and my few college friends were scattered across the country, starting their own lives and careers. I was completely, terrifyingly alone, on the verge of truly giving up, of packing a single bag and figuring out which homeless shelter had the shortest waiting list. I found myself scrolling through the contacts on my cheap, pay-as-you-go phone. My finger hovered over a name I hadn't called in over a year. Dr. Alistair Davis. Dr. Davis had been my favorite professor, the advisor for my senior thesis. He was a man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair, round spectacles that were always perched on the end of his nose, and an unshakable belief in the power of the humanities. He saw things in my work that even I hadn't noticed. While my father saw useless trivia, Davis saw a unique, analytical mind. I hesitated. Calling him felt like an admission of the very failure he had always encouraged me to defy. But the silence in my apartment was deafening, and the thought of hearing one single friendly voice was too tempting to resist. I pressed the call button before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring, his voice as warm and resonant as I remembered. Amelia, what a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe the honor? The simple kindness in his tone was enough to crack the dam I had built around my emotions. My voice came out as a choked sob. Dr. Davis, I started, then had to stop to swallow the lump in my throat. Amelia, are you all right? You sound distressed. I couldn't hold it back anymore. The story tumbled out of me in a messy, tearful torrent. The Christmas dinner, the insults, being kicked out, the freezing apartment, the rejection letters, the eviction notice. I confessed the deepest, most shameful part of it all. He was right, I whispered, my voice raw. My dad was right, all along. I'm a failure. This degree, it is worthless. I can't even pay my rent. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to agree with me. Then he let out a short, sharp scoff. It wasn't a laugh of ridicule, but one of disbelief. Failure? Amelia, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, he said, his voice firm. Do you think I've spent 40 years in academia without learning to spot talent? Your father, with all due respect, is a man who can only measure value with a calculator. He's blind to anything that can't be quantified on a spreadsheet. But he's not wrong, I argued weakly. Look at me. I'm about to be on the street. He is profoundly wrong, Dr. Davis countered, his voice rising with passion. He is wrong about you. And he is wrong about your education. Do you remember your final thesis? I sniffled. The one on proxemics and visitor engagement in the new wing of the Met. Exactly, the one that was so brilliant it should have been published. You didn't just write about the paintings, Amelia. You analyzed how the width of the hallways, the placement of the benches, the color of the walls, and the flow of the rooms subconsciously guided thousands of people. You explained how an environment could make someone feel welcome, or intimidated, curious or bored. You don't just see art, Amelia. You see systems. You understand people. You understand how they interact with the world around them. That skill, my dear girl, is more valuable than any line of code or financial projection, if only you can find the right place to apply it. His words were like a balm on a raw wound. He wasn't just offering empty platitudes. He was reminding me of a part of myself I had forgotten, a part that had been buried under an avalanche of my father's scorn. I don't know where that place is, I said quietly. Well, he said, a new energy in his voice. Let's start small. I have an old friend, a fellow bibliophile named Arthur. He owns a small, independent bookstore downtown, The Last Page. It's a wonderful place, but it's struggling. The world of Amazon and big box retailers is eating him alive. He needs help, but he can't afford a traditional business consultant. He needs someone who thinks differently. My heart gave a little flutter. A bookstore. It's not a corner office, I grant you, Dr. Davis said. He can only pay a few $100s for the initial project, but it's a start. It's a place where you can test your theories in the real world. Think of it as a laboratory, Amelia. Go there. See the space. Understand the people who aren't coming in, and show Arthur, and more importantly, show yourself what that worthless degree of yours can really do. A lifeline. He had thrown me a lifeline. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something. It was an opportunity. More than that, it was validation. It was the first time since that horrible Christmas night that someone had looked at my mind and seen value instead of a liability. Okay, I said, my voice stronger now. Okay, Dr. Davis, I'll do it. I know you will, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. And Amelia, never, ever let a man with no imagination tell you the value of your dreams. The Last Page bookstore was exactly as Dr. Davis had described it, wonderful and struggling. It was wedged between a vape shop and a laundromat on a side street that got very little foot traffic. A small, tarnished bell jingled when I pushed open the heavy wooden door, announcing my arrival into a space that smelled of aging paper, dust, and faded dreams. Arthur, the owner, was a kind, stooped man with flour-dusted glasses and a cardigan that had more holes than a cheese grater. He looked at me with a weary but hopeful expression. "Alistair speaks very highly of you," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was surprisingly firm. "He says you see things differently. Frankly, my dear, at this point, I'll take any kind of seeing I can get. The only thing I see is red ink." He gave me a tour of the store. It was a labyrinth of towering, overstuffed shelves. Books were piled in teetering stacks on the floor, blocking aisles. The lighting was dim and yellow, casting long shadows that made the space feel cramped and gloomy. There was no clear organization. Fiction bled into history. Poetry was crammed next to cookbooks. It wasn't a place that invited browsing. It was a place that dared you to find what you were looking for. It was intimidating. It was, I realized with a jolt, the commercial equivalent of my father's dining room. A space that made you feel like you didn't belong. "I'll take the job," I told Arthur. He looked relieved. The few $100s he paid me was just enough to appease my landlord and buy myself another month in my cold apartment. But the real payment was the opportunity. For the first time, I wasn't just waiting tables. I was putting my mind to work. I didn't start by moving books. I started by observing. I spent the first 2 days sitting in a dusty corner, watching the few customers who trickled in. I watched how they moved, where they hesitated, what made their shoulders tense. They would enter, pause, just inside the door, looking overwhelmed, and then either make a beeline for a specific section they'd clearly come for, or drift aimlessly for a minute before leaving empty-handed. They weren't connecting with the space. My thesis on museum proxemics came roaring back to me. The principles were the same. A space needs to tell a story. It needs to guide, to welcome, to create an emotional experience. On the third day, I presented my plan to Arthur. "We're not just selling books," I told him, my voice filled with a conviction I hadn't felt in years. "We're selling an escape, a comfort, a thrill. The store needs to reflect that." He was skeptical but desperate, so he gave me his blessing. I spent the next 2 weeks working harder than I ever had in my life. I started by clearing the clutter, creating wide, open pathways. I dragged an old, forgotten armchair and a small table from the back room and placed them in a corner with a reading lamp, creating a cozy, inviting nook. Then came the reorganization. Instead of the rigid, academic structure of the Dewey Decimal System, I created sections based on an emotional journey. The Adventure Awaits section housed thrillers, fantasy, and travelogue. The heart of the matter had romance, family dramas, and poignant memoirs. A special section by the front window, which I cleaned until it sparkled, was called Find Your Spark, filled with books on creativity, new hobbies, and self-improvement. I convinced Arthur to let me use a small portion of my fee to buy a cheap coffee percolator and some mugs from a thrift store. I set up a small station near the back with a sign that read, "Have a cup on us. Stay a while." Finally, I cleared a prominent wall near the entrance and created a local voices feature, showcasing authors from our city. By the end of the month, the transformation was complete. The last page was no longer a dusty mausoleum of books. It was bright, airy, and welcoming. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the smell of paper. People were no longer just coming in, they were staying. They sat in the reading nook. They browsed the new, intuitively organized sections. They chatted with Arthur, who seemed to have grown 2 inches taller. Foot traffic tripled, sales more than doubled. Arthur was ecstatic. He pressed a bonus into my hand, an extra $200 with tears in his eyes. "I don't know how you did it, Amy," he said. "It's like you brought my store back to life." It was the first money I had ever earned from my mind, from my useless degree. Holding those crisp bills felt more satisfying than any paycheck I'd ever received. It was during that small high that my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a familiar, hesitant voice came through the line. It was Mark, my brother-in-law. Amy. Hi, it's Mark. He sounded deeply uncomfortable. Mark, what do you want? I asked. My voice flat. Well, Jessica and your dad, they were just wondering, he stammered. They just wanted me to call and make sure you weren't going to, come crawling back asking for money or anything. Jessica said to tell you the bank of Dad is officially closed. The words were a bucket of ice water extinguishing the warm glow of my recent victory, a call not of concern but of suspicion, a preemptive strike to humiliate me further. For a second the old shame washed over me, but then I looked around the transformed bookstore. I saw a young woman curled in the armchair, lost in a novel. I saw Arthur laughing with a customer by the coffee pot. I saw the tangible result of my own ideas, my own hard work. Something inside me shifted. The shame was still there, but it was now overlaid with a hard, protective layer of anger, an anger that wasn't destructive, but productive. Tell them not to worry, Mark, I said, my voice steady and cold. Tell them I'm doing just fine on my own, and then lose my number. I hung up before he could respond. The call, which was meant to remind me of my place as the family failure, had done the exact opposite. It had lit a fire under me. This small victory at the bookstore wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The success of the last page didn't go unnoticed, at least not within Doc Davis's small but influential circle of friends. Arthur, bless his heart, couldn't stop talking about the miracle worker who had saved his business. A week after I finished the project, I got a call from a woman who owned a small, struggling cafe a few blocks away. Arthur told me you have a gift for seeing the why behind a failing business, she said over the phone. My coffee is great, my pastries are fresh, but my tables are always empty. Can you help me? I went to her cafe, the daily grind, and the problem was immediately obvious. It was the same issue as the bookstore, just with a different coat of paint. The layout was clinical and impersonal. Small, uncomfortable chairs were arranged in rigid lines. The lighting was harsh and fluorescent, and the counter was a huge barrier between the staff and the customer. It felt less like a cozy cafe and more like a hospital cafeteria. It was a space designed for transactions, not for experiences. I used the same principles. I helped her rearrange the furniture into clusters, creating intimate spaces for conversation and solo nooks for people with laptops. We swapped the harsh overhead lights for warmer, individual lamps over each table. I suggested a simple change in procedure. Instead of shouting a name for an order, the baristas would bring the coffee to the customer's table. It was a small gesture, but it transformed the feeling from one of impersonal service to one of personal hospitality. Just like with the bookstore, the results were immediate and dramatic. The cafe became a neighborhood hub, sales soared. The owner was so grateful she paid me double what we had agreed upon, and wrote a glowing, if anonymous, testimonial for me. The pattern repeated itself. The cafe owner recommended me to a friend who ran a boutique clothing store, where customers felt too intimidated to touch the merchandise. I helped her redesign the store to encourage interaction, with more accessible displays, and a comfortable, well-lit lounge area near the dressing rooms. Success. That owner then told her dentist, whose sterile, anxiety-inducing waiting room was causing patients to cancel appointments. I helped him transform it into a calm, spa-like environment, with soft lighting, comfortable seating, and a small library of magazines and books. Success again. I was building a portfolio of incredible results, all based on the useless skills my father had so publicly ridiculed. I was applying my understanding of sociolinguistics to analyze the nonverbal language of a space. I was using my art history background to understand how color, light, and composition could affect human emotion. It was all connected. It was time to make it official. Sitting at the wobbly kitchen table in my tiny apartment, I went online and, for a small fee, registered my own business. I called it Humanity First Strategies. The name felt right. It was a direct rebuttal to my father's numbers first philosophy. My entire business model was built on the idea that, if you focus on making people feel seen, welcome, and understood, the profits will follow. I was still just one person, working from a laptop in a space the size of my parents' walk-in closet, but I was now, officially, a founder, a business owner. It felt surreal. A strange dynamic began to emerge with my clients. They were amazed by the results, but they were also hesitant to share the secret of their success. The owner of the boutique put it best. "No offense, Amy," she'd said, handing me my final check, "but you're my secret weapon. I don't want my competitors knowing how I turned things around." So, I became a ghost consultant. My work was passed along through word of mouth, from one desperate business owner to another. I started insisting on ironclad non-disclosure NDAs. They protected my clients' secrets, and they protected mine. It created an aura of mystery around Humanity First Strategies. The name was whispered in certain circles, but no one knew who was behind it. They just knew it worked. My financial situation stabilized. I was no longer eating instant noodles. I could afford fresh groceries, a new laptop that didn't freeze every 10 minutes, and even a few new items of clothing that weren't from a thrift store. I moved out of the depressing, cabbage-scented building and into a slightly larger, cleaner apartment in a better neighborhood. It wasn't luxury, but it was safe, warm, and mine. I had paid for it with my own mind. The secret transformation was in full swing. On the outside, to the one person who might have been checking my sister, probably through some social media stalking, I was still just Amy Evans, a single woman, living in a modest apartment. There was no flashy new car, no designer clothes, no public announcements of success. I was invisible, but on the inside, I was building an empire of my own, one small, human-centered space at a time. The anger and humiliation from that Christmas had become a quiet, steady engine, driving me forward. I didn't need their approval anymore. I was too busy earning my own, and the best part was, they had no idea. They still saw me as the family failure, the useless daughter with the worthless degree. The thought of the eventual reveal, whenever and wherever it might happen, was a quiet, satisfying hum beneath the surface of my busy new life. I was no longer a victim of their story. I was the author of my own. The email arrived on a rainy Monday morning. I was sitting at my small desk, nursing a cup of coffee, and reviewing the layout plans for a pediatric dental clinic I was consulting for. The subject line was simple and direct: consulting inquiry, Northwood Mutual Bank. I blinked, reading it again. Northwood Mutual. The name hit me like a physical shock. It was my father's bank. For over 30 years, Richard Evans had been a loyal, high-value client of Northwood Mutual. It was where he'd gotten the loan to start his logistics company. It was where my sister had her mortgage. The Evans family and Northwood Mutual were deeply intertwined. My first instinct was to delete the email. This was too close to home. It felt dangerous, like flying too close to the sun. My entire business was built on anonymity, on being the ghost consultant. Working for my father's own bank felt like a monumental risk. What if he found out? The thought of him discovering my work, only to mock it and potentially sabotage it, was terrifying. But curiosity, a stronger force than fear, made me open it. The email was from a man named Daniel Peterson, the regional manager for Northwood Mutual. It was concise and professional, but I could read the desperation between the lines. "Miss Evans, my name is Daniel Peterson. I was given your contact information by Eleanor Vance, the owner of the Serenity Grand Hotel. She spoke of your work with her establishment in the highest possible terms." I am writing to you under the assumption of the strict confidentiality that Miss Vance assured me you operate under. Northwood Mutual is facing a significant challenge with our flagship branch in the downtown financial district. Despite being in a prime location, we are experiencing a steady and alarming decline in customer traffic and new account acquisitions, particularly among the under 40 demographic. Our internal data analysts have reviewed everything from interest rates to marketing spend, and they are stumped. The branch is, for all intents and purposes, failing. We are looking for a new perspective, a different approach. Ms. Vance referred to your methodology as unconventional but brutally effective. That is what we need. We are prepared to offer a substantial consulting fee for a comprehensive analysis and strategic plan to revitalize the brand. I would like to schedule a meeting to discuss this with you at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Daniel Peterson, Regional Manager, Northwood Mutual Bank. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. The Serenity Grand Hotel had been my biggest project to date, a high-end boutique hotel that was on the verge of bankruptcy before I had helped them redesign their lobby, restaurant, and guest services to feel more intuitive and luxurious. It had been a massive success, and now that success had led me here. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My father, the man who worshipped at the altar of finance and tangible assets, was a customer at a bank that was failing for reasons his own mindset couldn't comprehend. They had data analysts, financial experts, and marketing teams, but they couldn't solve a problem that was fundamentally human. This was the ultimate test. It was one thing to fix a bookstore or a cafe. It was another thing entirely to walk into the heart of the financial world, my father's world, and tell them they were doing it all wrong. It was a chance to prove on the biggest possible stage that my worthless degree had a value they couldn't even begin to calculate. And the best part, my father would never see it coming. He and Jessica would walk into that bank, their bank, and they would see the changes. They would see the new layout, the new systems, the new atmosphere. And they would have absolutely no idea that the failure of the family was the architect behind it all. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the pull of the opportunity was stronger. This was a chance to confront the ghost of my father's disapproval on my own terms, in my own arena. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about reclaiming my own narrative. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I began to type my reply. Mr. Peterson, thank you for reaching out. I would be happy to discuss the challenges at your downtown branch. Please let me know when you are available to meet. Sincerely, Evans, Founder, Humanity First Strategies. Walking into the flagship branch of Northwood Mutual felt like stepping into a time capsule from night. The air was cold and still, carrying the faint, sterile scent of industrial cleaner. My footsteps echoed on the polished marble floors, a sound that seemed to announce me as an intruder. The entire space was designed to convey power and intimidation, from the soaring ceilings to the heavy, dark wood paneling on the walls. And then there were the tellers. They weren't people. They were disembodied hands and torsos, visible behind thick, bulletproof glass panels. Each customer had to speak through a small metallic grate, a design that screamed, "We do not trust you." It was a physical manifestation of everything my father believed in: security, impenetrability, and a clear hierarchy of power. It was also, I knew instantly, the reason the bank was failing. Daniel Peterson, a man in his late 40s with a kind face etched with worry lines, met me in the lobby. He looked out of place in his own bank, like a gardener in a sterile laboratory. "Miss Evans, thank you for coming," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "As you can see, it's quiet, too quiet." I didn't need to see their data. I could feel the problem. The entire environment was non-verbally communicating a message of exclusion. It was saying, if you don't already have a lot of money, you don't belong here. It was a space built for my father's generation, for people who were comfortable with the formal, intimidating rituals of old-world banking. For anyone younger, anyone who valued connection and transparency, it was as welcoming as a tax audit. The problem isn't your interest rates, Miss Peterson, I said after walking the space for only 10 minutes. It's your architecture. This place feels like a fortress. People don't come here to build a future. They come here to be judged. He looked taken aback, but he nodded slowly. I've felt that. I just didn't have the words for it. So what do we do? 2 weeks later, I stood in a sleek, top-floor boardroom in front of Mr. Peterson and the bank's regional board of directors. The room was filled with men and women in severe, dark suits who looked at me and my simple portfolio with undisguised skepticism. I was an unknown quantity, a woman with a strange company name, and a humanities degree in a world of MBAs. I could feel their doubt. It was a more polite version of my father's disdain. I didn't start with projections or charts. I started with a story. Imagine a young couple, I began, my voice calm and steady. They're in their late 20s. They've just gotten married, and they're thinking about buying their first home. They're nervous, but they're also excited. They need a mortgage. They walk into this bank. What do they see? They see marble floors that echo. They see tellers behind glass, like prisoners. They see loan officers in closed-off offices. What does this space say to them? I paused, letting the question hang in the air. It says, this is a serious, complicated process, and you are not prepared. It creates anxiety, so they leave. They go to the friendlier-looking credit union down the street, or they use a faceless online lender, because at least the website doesn't make them feel small. I had them. I could see a flicker of understanding in their eyes. Then I unveiled my plan. It was radical. First, I said, clicking to a slide that showed a digital rendering, we rip out the teller cages. A few of them gasped. We replace them with open circular pods, like you'd see in an Apple store. The tellers, who we will retrain and rename financial guides, will stand side by side with the customers, not opposite them. We are breaking down the physical barrier to create a psychological one of partnership. Next, I continued, switching the slide, we install a high-end self-serve coffee bar in the corner. For free. This does two things. It encourages people to linger, to feel comfortable in the space, and it changes the sensory experience from one of cold sterility to one of warm hospitality. And finally, and this is the most important part, I said, my voice filled with passion, we use this beautiful large space for the community. On Saturdays, when the bank is normally closed, we host free financial literacy workshops. How to build credit. First-time homebuyer 1. Saving for retirement. On any income. We stop being just a place that holds money, and we start being a resource that builds financial health. I could see the skepticism warring with intrigue on their faces. An older board member, a man who looked like he had been carved from the same granite as the bank's facade, spoke up. A coffee shop. Workshops. Ms. Evans, we are a financial institution, not a community center. How can you possibly justify the expense? This was the moment. This was where my useless degree became my superpower. Because, sir, I said, turning to him directly, you are losing the trust of an entire generation. My expertise in sociolinguistics has taught me that communication is more than 80% non-verbal. Your current environment is non-verbally communicating distrust, exclusion, and intimidation. Younger customers don't want to be talked down to. They want to be collaborated with. By making these changes, you are sending a new message. You are saying, we are on your side. We are here to help. We are part of your community. That trust, gentlemen and ladies, is an asset more valuable than anything you currently have on your balance sheet. It's the one thing your competitors haven't figured out how to buy. I finished my presentation and a heavy silence fell over the room. I held my breath. I had laid all my cards on the table. Finally, Mr. Peterson, who had been watching me with a growing sense of excitement, spoke. I think, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, that Ms. Evans has just given us the answer we've been looking for. A vote was taken. It was close, but it passed. I walked out of that boardroom, not just as a consultant, but as the director of a multi-million-dollar renovation project for my own father's bank. I was in a position of power he couldn't even imagine, and he had no idea. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. I was on site at the bank almost every day, overseeing demolition and construction, finalizing design choices, and developing the curriculum for the new weekend workshops. The project was massive, and the pressure was immense, but I felt alive. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was building something real, something that would help people, and I was doing it on my own terms. My anonymity was my shield. To the construction crews, I was just Ms. Evans, the project lead. To the bank staff undergoing retraining, I was the consultant from that mysterious firm, Humanity First Strategies. No one knew my last name or my connection to their most prominent client. About 2 weeks before the scheduled grand reopening, as I was standing in the half-finished lobby admiring the newly installed warm, wooden floors, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Dad. I hadn't spoken to since Christmas. I hadn't wanted to. I let it ring, my heart hammering against my ribs. It went to voicemail. I took a shaky breath, trying to regain my composure. A minute later, it buzzed again. He was calling back. He was persistent. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello? I said, my voice carefully neutral. Emilia. Finally, he barked, as if I had been the one avoiding him. Listen, I'm calling because I need to vent. You will not believe the nonsense going on at my bank. I froze, my blood turning to ice. My bank. He meant my project. What are you talking about? I asked, trying to keep my voice from trembling. Northwood Mutual. They've gone completely insane, he scoffed, and I could practically hear him shaking his head in disgust. I drove past the downtown branch today, and it's a construction zone. They're tearing the whole place apart. I called my guy there, Peterson, and he tells me they're doing some kind of revitalization project. He was spewing all this nonsense about community engagement and open concept design. He let out a harsh laugh. Can you believe it, Amy? They're putting a coffee shop in the bank. A coffee shop, run by some artsy-fartsy consultant, I hear. What an incredible waste of money. It's probably some 20-something with a worthless degree who convinced them it was a good idea. His words. They were the exact same words, the same tone of derision, the same absolute certainty in his own narrow worldview. Each one was a perfectly aimed dart, striking the most vulnerable parts of me. For a moment I wasn't Miss Evans, the successful project director. I was just Amy, the failure, the loser, the girl with the worthless degree. A wave of doubt, cold and sickening, washed over me. What if he was right? What if this was all a huge, expensive mistake? What if I was just a fraud who had gotten lucky with a bookstore and a cafe? The confidence I had so carefully built over the past year began to crumble. The weight of the multi-million-dollar project suddenly felt unbearable. I was an imposter. I have to go, I managed to say, my voice tight. Right. Well, just wanted to tell you. Don't ever bank with them. They've clearly lost their minds, he said, and hung up. I leaned against a half-painted wall, my legs feeling weak. I wanted to call Mr. Peterson and quit. I wanted to run away, to disappear back into my ghost consultant life, where the stakes weren't so high, and my father's voice couldn't reach me. Just as I was about to spiral completely, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dr. David. I had emailed him an update on the project a few days earlier. His text was short, but it was everything I needed. They will doubt the methods, Amy, because they cannot understand them. But they will never, ever be able to argue with the results. Trust your work. Trust yourself. I read the message 3 times. Trust the results. He was right. My father could mock the methods all he wanted. He could call me a failure, and my degree worthless. But he wouldn't be able to argue with a packed lobby, with soaring new account numbers, with a revitalized community institution. I took a deep, steadying breath. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I opened my phone's contact list, found my father's name, and held my finger over it. Then, I pressed delete contact. He didn't deserve to have a direct line to my insecurities anymore. I turned my attention back to the construction site, my eyes tracing the beautiful, open space we were creating. He could laugh all he wanted. I had work to do. It was a Tuesday in early December, almost a full year after the Christmas expulsion, when the invitation arrived. It was nestled in my mailbox, between a utility bill and a credit card offer. Its thick, cream-colored cardstock and elegant calligraphy, standing out like a flamingo in a flock of pigeons. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. I knew who it was from. The seal on the back was the crest of my father's company, Evans Logistics. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the heavy card. Richard and Carol Evans, request the pleasure of your company at a celebration honoring the 30th anniversary of Evans Logistics. The event was being held in the Grand Ballroom of the Lakewood Grand Resort, the most expensive and exclusive venue in the city. It was scheduled for the Saturday before Christmas. A reunion. My father loved grand gestures, and this was his magnum opus. It wasn't just an anniversary party. The subtext was clear. It was a victory lap, a public declaration of his success. And as I knew from a brief, unavoidable phone call with my mother a few weeks prior, it was also a strategic business move. He was on the verge of finalizing a major partnership with the investor I had met last Christmas, the observant and influential Mr. Henderson. This party was the final act of courtship, designed to showcase the power and stability of the Evans family and its empire. So why was I invited? I wasn't naive. This wasn't an olive branch. It wasn't an apology or an attempt at reconciliation. I knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in my gut, that I was being invited to be a prop. I was the before picture to my sister Jessica's after. I was the family's resident failure, the cautionary tale wheeled out to make their own success seem that much more impressive. My presence would serve as a dark backdrop against which their brilliance could shine. Look at our golden child, Jessica, the real estate magnate. And look at our other one, Amelia, the one who squandered her potential. Aren't we magnanimous for even inviting her? The thought made my blood run cold, then hot. The old Amy would have thrown the invitation away, her stomach churning with anxiety and shame. She would have stayed home, hiding in her apartment, letting them define her by her absence. But I wasn't the old Amy. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Got the invite? Do try to wear something that isn't a waitress uniform. We want Henderson to be impressed, not concerned. The condescension was so pure, so potent. It was almost laughable. They hadn't changed. They hadn't grown. They still saw me as the same girl they had kicked out into the snow a year ago. They had absolutely no idea who I had become. They were walking into a battle without realizing their opponent was armed. I looked at the elegant invitation in my hand, then at the text from my sister. The stage was being set. The actors were being called. They thought they were writing the script, casting me in the role of the loser. They had no idea that I was about to give the performance of a lifetime. I picked up my phone and sent a simple, one-word reply to my mother's RSVP email. Yes, the Lakewood Grand Resort Ballroom was a cathedral of wealth. Chandeliers dripping with crystals hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the hundreds of guests mingling below. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a tasteful backdrop to the low hum of conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. The air smelled of expensive perfume and limitless ambition. I had chosen my armor carefully, not a flashy gown or a statement piece of jewelry, but a simple, impeccably tailored navy blue dress that spoke of quiet confidence. My hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and my only accessory was a thin silver bracelet. I didn't look like a waitress, and I didn't look like I was trying too hard. I looked like I belonged. The thought gave me a small secret thrill. I spotted my family near the entrance, holding court. My father was in his element, his voice booming as he glad-handed a group of men in tuxedos. My mother stood beside him, a perfect, smiling accessory, in a glittering gold dress, and Jessica, draped in blood-red silk, was laughing, her head thrown back, making sure everyone could see the diamond necklace sparkling at her throat. As I approached, their circle fell silent. All eyes turned to me. My father's smile tightened into a familiar, dismissive line. "Ah, Amelia," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone around them to hear. He was putting me on display. "You made it." He turned to the group, which included the man I immediately recognized as Mr. Henderson. The investor's face was neutral, his eyes sharp and observant, just as I remembered. He was watching me, taking my measure. "Everyone," my father announced, with the false bonhomie of a ringmaster introducing a sideshow act. "This is my other daughter, Amelia." The word other hung in the air, thick with meaning. "She's the one with the, what was it again?" "The art degree." A wave of polite, pitying smiles rippled through the group. I saw it in their eyes, the quick, dismissive categorization. "This is the unsuccessful one, the artistic one." The disappointment. Jessica, never one to miss an opportunity to twist the knife, stepped forward and placed a hand on my arm. Her touch felt proprietary, condescending. "She's very creative," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. The insult was perfectly veiled. In this room, creative was a euphemism for unemployed. It meant I didn't understand profit margins or quarterly reports. It meant I was not a serious person. I was being mocked and laughed at, not with loud, overt jeers, but with the quiet, cutting condescension of the wealthy. This was it. This was the final humiliation they had orchestrated for me. I was their prop, just as I had predicted. I looked past Jessica to my brother-in-law, Mark. He stood slightly behind her, looking deeply uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a point on the floor, his jaw tight. He knew this was wrong, but his silence was his consent. He was an enabler, content to witness cruelty as long as it kept him safe in the family's good graces. I held my head high, my expression calm. I let their words, their pitying looks, their veiled insults, wash over me without reaction. I met Mr. Henderson's gaze for a brief moment. His expression was still unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not pity but curiosity. He was observing the dynamics, filing them away. "It's lovely to see you all again," I said, my voice even and clear. I gave a small, polite nod, and then deliberately excused myself. "If you'll excuse me, I'm going to get a drink." I walked away, feeling their eyes on my back. I could almost hear their whispered comments, the renewed round of praise for Jessica now that the family failure had been presented and dismissed. I let them have their moment. I let them believe they had won. The night was still young, and the final act hadn't even begun. They were so busy playing their old tired game, they had no idea that I had already changed the rules. An hour later, my father took to the stage at the front of the ballroom. A spotlight found him, and a hush fell over the crowd. He stood at a podium bearing the logo of Evans Logistics, a proud king surveying his kingdom. I stood near the back of the room, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, watching. 30 years, he began, his voice filled with emotion. 30 years ago, I started with a single truck and a dream built on hard work, fiscal responsibility, and smart, practical decisions. He went on, weaving a tale of his own brilliance. He talked about growth, about assets, about the importance of a strong financial foundation. He was performing for one person in particular, Mr. Henderson, who stood near the front, watching with a polite, attentive expression. This speech was the closing argument for their partnership. In business, as in life, you have to be able to spot value, my father declared, his voice ringing with authority. You have to know a good investment from a bad one. You can't be swayed by frivolous ideas or passing fads. You need substance. You need results. He was building to a crescendo. the finale of his self-congratulatory symphony. It was at that exact moment that the side doors of the ballroom burst open. A man rushed in, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He was wearing a suit, but his tie was askew, and his hair was a mess. He looked frantic. He ignored the uniformed staff trying to intercept him, and scanned the room with wild eyes. I recognized him instantly. It was Daniel Peterson, the regional manager of Northwood Mutual. My heart leaped into my throat. What was he doing here? What could possibly be so urgent? My father interrupted mid-sentence, faltered. He stared at the intruder, his face a mask of annoyance. "Can I help you?" he called out, his tone frosty. But Mr. Peterson didn't even look at him. His eyes continued to sweep the crowd, searching. Then, they landed on me. A look of profound relief washed over his face. He changed direction and started walking, almost running, directly toward me, weaving through the stunned guests. He cut my father off from the attention of the entire room. The spotlight was still on the stage, but every single head in that ballroom was now turned, watching this frantic man make a beeline for the quiet, unassuming woman in the navy blue dress at the back. He reached me, breathing heavily. "Evans," he said, his voice a ragged whisper loud enough for those around us to hear. "Thank God I found you. I am so sorry to interrupt." "Dan, what is it?" I asked, my own voice low, trying to contain the situation. "What's wrong?" "We have an emergency," he said, pulling out his phone and showing me a screen filled with error messages. The grand reopening of the downtown branch was today. The publicity was bigger than we anticipated. The new community investment portal we launched, the one you designed, it just went live an hour ago. The traffic crashed the main server. The room was now utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. My father, still on stage, looked completely baffled, his power speech forgotten. Mr. Peterson continued, his voice urgent. "The system automatically locked the disbursement accounts. There's a $30,000 grant for the Inner City Youth Center that was supposed to be released tonight. It's trapped. I can't override it. The board can't override it. The only person with the credentials to push it through the backup server is the lead project strategist." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I need your executive override code. Now." A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air out of the room. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me. The nobody. The failure. My father finally found his voice. He stepped away from the podium, his face contorting in confusion and rage. "Peterson?" he bellowed across the ballroom, his voice cracking slightly. "What the hell are you talking to her for? She's my daughter. She doesn't know anything about banking." The great Richard Evans was no longer in control. The narrative had been ripped from his hand, and in the stunned silence that followed his outburst, another voice, calm and inquisitive, cut through the tension. It came from the front of the room. It was Mr. Henderson. "Wait a moment," Mr. Henderson said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a natural authority that commanded attention. He took a step forward, turning away from my sputtering father, and looking directly at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, electrifying disbelief. "Peterson just called you Miss Evans. Are you the A. Evans? From Humanity First Strategy?" The name hung in the air, a foreign phrase in this room that only understood names like Evans. Logistics. My father looked utterly bewildered, his head snapping between me, Mr. Peterson, and Mr. Henderson. He had no idea what was happening. Before I could answer, Miss Henderson continued, a low whistle of astonishment in his voice. He was speaking to the room now, as much as to me. "Humanity First Strategies, the ghost consultant, who turned around the Serenity Grand Hotel in 6 months, the one who fixed the daily grind. The firm Northwood Mutual has on an exclusive, multi-year retainer to overhaul their entire customer experience. I've been trying to get a meeting with them for months." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. These were investors, business owners, people who tracked success. They knew the names, they knew the stories. They just didn't know the face. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place in their minds, and the picture they formed was impossible. Jaws dropped. I saw it happen all around. People who had given me pitying smiles just an hour ago were now staring at me with a mixture of shock and awe. The entire social geometry of the room had just been irrevocably altered. My father, his face now a sickly shade of gray, turned pale. He looked at Daniel Peterson, his eyes begging for a denial, for this to be some kind of horrible mistake. Mr. Peterson, however, just nodded grimly. He looked at my father, but he spoke with the clear, formal tone of a man setting the record straight. "Richard," he said, and the use of my father's first name was a dismissal in itself. "Miss Amelia Evans is the founder and CEO of Humanity First Strategies. She is the lead strategist for the bank's entire regional revitalization project. The board has given her full autonomy. She has final approval on all major projects and expenditures." Mr. Peterson paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then, he delivered the final, devastating blow. "That includes the approval of all new high-risk commercial loans." The implication was a sledgehammer. It struck my father with visible force. He swayed slightly on the stage, gripping the podium for support. His company, as I knew from overhearing his panicked phone calls for months, was over-levered. He was counting on a massive loan from Northwood Mutual to stay afloat. A loan he was trying to secure with the help of Mr. Henderson's potential partnership. The loan that now, ultimately required my approval. The man who had called me a useless nobody now needed my signature to save his empire. The room was a tableau of shock. I looked at my sister, Jessica. The smug, condescending queen of the family had completely vanished. She stood frozen, her blood-red dress suddenly looking garish. Her champagne flute trembled in her hand, and her perfectly made-up face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked speechless. She was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as her failure of a little sister, but as a terrifying, unknowable power. Next to her, the enabler Mark looked like he was going to be physically sick. His face was ashen. He wasn't looking at my father or Jessica. He was looking at me, and his eyes were filled with a dawning, pathetic regret. He had stood by, silent and complicit, as I was mocked and belittled, choosing the side of power and money. He had just realized, in the most public way imaginable, that he had backed the wrong horse. His silence hadn't bought him safety. It had earned him a front-row seat to his own downfall. And then there was the neutral observer, the final judge in this impromptu court. Mr. Henderson's face had cycled through curiosity, to disbelief, to outright shock. Now it settled on an expression of profound, impressed respect. A slow smile spread across his lips. He looked from my shattered father on the stage to me, standing calm and composed in the center of the storm I had created. His smile was the ultimate validation. It was a verdict, delivered in front of everyone who mattered in my father's world. In his eyes, I was no longer the creative, unserious daughter. I was the genius in the room. The ripple effect was immediate. Mr. Henderson's impressed smile gave everyone else permission to react. The hushed whispers turned into excited chatter. People weren't looking at Richard Evans, the titan of logistics, anymore. They were looking at me. They were looking at the ghost consultant, A. Evans, revealed in the flesh. I had stolen my father's spotlight, his power, and his narrative, all without raising my voice. The person they had excluded had just become the center of their universe. In the eye of the hurricane, I finally turned my gaze to the man on the stage, my father. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, a fallen monument in a spotlight that now seemed harsh and accusatory. The silence in the room stretched, waiting for my response, for my final word. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. My voice when I spoke was calm, even, and carried across the silent ballroom with chilling clarity. "You said my degree was worthless, Dad," I began, each word a carefully placed stone, building a wall between who he thought I was and who I had become. "You said I was a failure, You called me a nobody and kicked me out of your house on Christmas because you were ashamed of me. I let the memory of that humiliation hang in the air for everyone to witness. I saw my mother flinch, her hand flying to her mouth. A year later, I continued, my voice unwavering. The manager of your bank just interrupted your 30th anniversary party to publicly beg me, in front of all your friends and colleagues, to save his branch. The same branch you need a multi-million-dollar loan from to stop your own company from going under. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt no fear, only a profound, quiet pity. He had built his entire world on a foundation of numbers and disdain for anything he couldn't measure, and that world had just crumbled because he had failed to measure the value of his own daughter. I turned away from his shattered expression and looked at the horrified Mr. Peterson. I gave him a small, reassuring smile. Dan, I said, my voice shifting back to professional efficiency. It's all right, I'm on my way to the office now to handle it. Go back to the branch and authorize the backup server. I'll push the grant through from my end within the hour. Thank you, Miss Evans, he breathed, relief flooding his face. Thank you. He gave a curt, respectful nod, and then hurried out of the ballroom, his mission accomplished. I then did the one thing they never expected. I started to walk away. I walked past the clusters of stunned guests, their eyes following my every move. I walked past my sister, Jessica, who looked like a statue carved from ice, and her husband, Mark, who couldn't even lift his head. As I neared the exit, I saw a familiar figure standing by the door, a proud, knowing smile on his face. It was Dr. Alistair Davis. I had invited him as my +1, my one true ally. He had seen the whole thing. He didn't say a word, just gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a shared victory. His belief in me had been the seed, and this was the full, shocking bloom. My last sight as I left the ballroom was of Mr. Henderson. He walked directly up to my father, who was still standing frozen on the stage. The investor didn't offer a handshake or a word of condolence. He just looked at my father with an expression of utter disdain, gave a small, sharp shake of his head, and turned and walked away. The potential partnership, the lifeline my father had been so desperate for, was dead. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I left my family standing alone in the wreckage of their own making, publicly humiliated. Their power and prestige evaporated in the space of 5 minutes. They had wanted to host a celebration of their success, but I had turned it into a funeral for their arrogance. I didn't need my father's money or his approval. I didn't need the inheritance he held over my head. I had created my own, and it was worth so much more. The epilogue of my old life and the prologue of my new one began in the quiet hum of a server room. It was nearly midnight when I arrived at the now empty Northwood Mutual branch. The space was beautiful. Warm light fell on the polished wooden floors. The coffee bar stood waiting for its first customers, and the open concept pods felt welcoming even in the dark. It was a space that promised help, not judgment. I bypassed the security, entered my executive credentials, and within minutes, I had rerouted the system and released the $30,000 grant to the youth center. It was a simple act, a few keystrokes, but it felt momentous. I had used my power not for revenge, but to do something good. 3 months later, I was in my own office. It was a corner space in a downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. It was minimalist and clean, filled with light. My company, Humanity First Strategies, had exploded. After the Lakewood Grand incident, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Being the mysterious ghost consultant was one thing. Being the woman who had publicly and spectacularly outmaneuvered Richard Evans was another. I had become a legend in the business world. I had to hire a team. Miss Peterson called me with the first quarter results for the revitalized branch. They had broken every single performance record. New accounts among the under 40 demographic were up by 400. Customer satisfaction scores were the highest in the bank's history. My methods, the ones my father had mocked as frivolous and artsy, had produced the kind of numbers he could only dream of. That afternoon, a file landed on my desk. It was my father's commercial loan application from Northwood Mutual. As the lead strategist on retainer, all high-risk applications still required my final review and sign-off. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the final exercise of my newfound power. I opened the file. It was a chaotic jumble of bad debts, overly optimistic projections, and a clear failure to adapt to a changing market. His company wasn't just struggling, it was sinking. He had been so focused on maintaining the appearance of strength that he had let the foundation rot from within. My hand hovered over the signature line. I could sign it. I could grant him the loan and be the magnanimous daughter, the savior. It would be the ultimate power play. Or I could deny it. I could deliver the final, crushing blow, the ultimate revenge for a lifetime of dismissal. I thought about it for a long, quiet moment. I thought of the girl, shivering, in the snow, on Christmas Day. I thought of the man, who had called her a failure. Then I looked at the file again, not as a daughter, but as a CEO. I looked at the numbers, the cold, hard facts that he respected so much. And the facts were clear. It was a bad investment. I picked up my pen, but I didn't sign. Instead, I took out a large, red stamp from my desk drawer. With a firm, steady hand, I pressed it onto the front page of the application. The words stood out in stark, undeniable clarity. Deny. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of business. It was the final, quiet proof that I had moved beyond his world and his rules. My victory wasn't in destroying him. It was in building myself to a place where his fate was simply a business decision I was qualified to make. I closed the file and looked out at the city lights twinkling to life as dusk fell. I was no longer the worthless daughter. I was the owner of my own company, the CEO of my own life. I was finally at peace, defined not by the labels my family had tried to burn onto my skin, but by the quiet, unshakable truth of my own worth. My story is proof that the world will try to put you in a box, to label you with words like failure or useless, but those labels only have the power you give them. My father's definition of success was based on money and status, but I learned that true wealth is building a life on your own terms, using the unique gifts that only you have. So I want to ask you all a question. What labels have you refused to accept in your own life? What passions have you been told were worthless that you knew deep down were your greatest strength? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds and finding your own power. Thanks for watching.